a Friday night Pac-12 game, so that should be pretty exciting. Number 10 Utah at number 19 Oregon State. Dalton, what is the one thing you're looking forward to in this game?
You're looking at the two most unique and the two most physical teams in the Pac-12. They have the same goals. They want to run the football. They want to play defense. They want to play games in a phone booth. And it's an interesting matchup, especially with Utah now having to go to Corvallis. They've got two big home wins against Florida and against UCLA. They've really stepped up their game stopping the run the last 2 weeks. They, you would look at them for the season and go, well, they're 66 in run D grade. But over the last 2 weeks, they moved up to 6. And their performance in run defense against UCLA is what won them the ball game, outside of the pick six on the first play. Oregon State's going to have to find some holes here because we've talked about them over the last week. They want to win a certain way. They want to run the football off tackle over and over and over, and occasionally get a shot on play action with Uiagalelei. The biggest thing Oregon State's going to have to do is read the fronts. All right, when Utah's in a 4-man front, 79th in the country in run D grade. Okay, wow. They've got this thing where they kind of rotate between a 4-man front and a 5-man front. Their 5-man front is elite. When they have 5 defensive linemen, they're an elite run-stopping team. It caused UCLA problems. It caused Florida problems early on. Against Baylor, you could see kind of the shift between the two. In a 4-man front, Baylor had a lot of success running the ball on them. And in a 5, it got a little bit better for Utah. They really like to mix it up with their fronts depending on run and pass situation. The other big thing I think Oregon State needs to do is have a threat with Uiagalelei running the ball. They did a better job of this last week against Washington State. The first 3 games, he only had 11 carries for 43 yards, and last week he had 6 for 72. He scored a touchdown in all 4 games, but he got more involved, especially in the second half last week against Washington State. You can see Utah, their backside defenders, if they don't respect the quarterback run, they sell out. They sell out on traditional run, right, to the back. Baylor had a threat at least. You see Robertson only carried 4 times for about 20 yards for Baylor. But the threat of speed option, the threat of read option, all of that stuff really made Utah stay home. You have to make them stay home as opposed to just selling out. Graham Mertz for Florida is not a running threat. Last week, Dante Moore was not a running threat. I'm not sure he ran the ball. I think he had 2 scrambles, but in the read option game and anything in the design game, Moore was non-existent. So when Utah's backside defenders can sell out to the back, they're an elite run defense. I think Oregon State has to involve Uiagalelei in the run game to make just the gaps open up for them. Make Utah play with gap discipline, especially on the backside, and then you have a chance to run the football because they're not going to drop back on Utah and just throw. It's not their style. Uiagalelei over the last 3 weeks is the least accurate passer in the Pac-12 after a really good week 1 start against weaker competition. Oregon State has to win a certain way, and the way they're going to do that, I think, needs to be with an added dimension of their quarterback running the football.
Absolutely. And I think the biggest storyline is the other quarterback in this game. And quite frankly, who will be the other quarterback in this game? Because Cameron Rising last week was a full participant in practice. All the reports that came out before that game against UCLA was, hey, he's going to be able to go. Then all of a sudden, like a few hours before kick, even the night before, reports started to trickle out that said, hey, yeah, Cam's not going to be playing this week. This week, he is splitting first-team reps with Nate Johnson in Utah. And, yeah, man, it's going to be interesting in whether or not Cam Rising and also Brant Keithy, we don't know too much about his status after he also recovers from torn ACL. We don't know about his practice status as much as Rising, but they need both those guys back, man. And it's kind of funny to me, though, honestly, because, listen, Utah 4-0 for the first time since 2017. They beat 2 ranked teams, Florida, who's currently ranked, UCLA, who was ranked at the time. In my interview with Kyle Whittingham, the head coach, I asked him, I was like, hey, coach, what is the most important thing for Utah to three-peat this year? And usually you get coach speak saying, we just got to do our job, do your assignment and all that. He told me the biggest thing, he goes, above all else, Cam Rising has got to be able to go. So that to me was like, okay, Kyle was telling me, hey, we need Cam or else this is not going to be great. They're 4-0 right now, man. They're doing well without Cam Rising. So maybe Kyle Whittingham was even, holding his cards close to his chest a little bit in that interview with me. But yeah, man, they need him back though, because this has been the 11th worst Power 5 team in terms of EPA per pass. Oregon State has a really good defense, top 25 in that same metric as well. And then obviously you mentioned, did a great breakdown of the Oregon State run game, because that really is the key to this game, in my opinion, is Oregon State is 4th in EPA per rush, tied for 5th in rushing grade, and 4th in run blocking grade among Power 5 teams. 7 yards per attempt against Washington State, but the problem was, like we mentioned before, they could run the ball in the first half. DJ Uyunglele only had 12 dropbacks in the first half. He had 26 in the second half because they were down by 3 scores, and he had to come back. And he didn't play well, man. He only had a 50% completion rate and a 61 passing grade. And the other thing you mentioned too, Utah has experience with teams that want to run the football, dominant run games, and inconsistent quarterbacks. Utah has experience with making those teams rely on the quarterbacks. Remember that week 1 game, Graham Mertz was relied on in that game. He only ran the ball 16 times compared to 51 dropbacks in that game. And as we saw in the Tennessee game for Florida, Florida wants to rely on that run game, and when they can be dominant. But if Utah can take away that run game like they did with Florida, like to Oregon State, this could be a problem for Oregon State, man, with DJ Uyunglele, because Utah's run defense has been really good. You see right there, 1.7 yards per attempt allowed. That leads the Power 5. So Utah's had a good run defense, and I think it's a great point that you made, that it really is a great run defense when there's a 5-man front. If I am Kyle Whittingham, I'm probably setting a 5-man front most of this game, because I think Oregon State's really going to try to rely on that run game. But ultimately, Dalton, who will come out on top in this Friday night Pac-12 showdown?
It's going to be ugly. You mentioned the 5-man front, and I think you're right. I think you're going to see it a ton with Oregon State playing so many tight ends. They play a ton of 12 personnel, and they just run right behind it. I think Rising being in this game would be a huge difference. I think this is a tight one. It's on the road. It's a short week for Utah. I'm going to take Utah actually on the road 21-17, not knowing 100% if Rising is going to play. It would make a big difference because the last 2 weeks, Oregon State's really struggling in coverage. Washington State got vertical on last week, as we covered on Monday. San Diego State actually got behind them a few times and just missed the throw. Oregon State, the cracks in the secondary are showing. And if Rising plays, I think this is a little more decisively Utah. But I think the lesson here, we talked about it Monday, and I think Oregon State, with their style, much like Florida and much like what happened in UCLA the other day, don't fall behind Utah.
Yeah.
You can't. You just can't. They need to establish this run game. They need to get a little creative early and get a lead if they're going to win this game. But Utah's defense, that's to me, that's an elite unit. It's the best unit on the field in this game. And I think it's the one team, maybe not the only team, that's probably cut. Washington and Oregon they're physical, but Utah matches their physicality. Whereas Washington State last week didn't, but they were also explosive enough to get ahead. This is a completely different game than they just played. And I think Utah is going to be up to the task. They just, locked down a UCLA team in the running game who, coming into that game, was leading the country in yards per carry. I'm going to take Utah 21-17, and I think if Rising plays, then you could see the margin a little wider than that.
Yeah, we're both taking Utah in this game, and Utah is actually the underdog in this game. Utah is currently +3 at Oregon State right now, and both of us picked UCLA over Utah last week. We were wrong, and Utah fans in our comment section were very quick to let us know that we were wrong. I think now we're throwing them a bone here. I think we're both picking Utah. I'm picking Utah 24-21 in this game. Listen, man, this Utah team is already a top 10 team in the country without its star quarterback, and I am right now cautiously optimistic that Rising will be able to go. I have no intel on that, just from what I've seen in terms of the practice reports. He's been a full participant in practice without limitations for 2 weeks now. Hopefully that means he's finally able to go on Friday night, but we will see.